My boss was railing on about how great Thomas Sowell is, so I sent him a link to your video and explained there's a part 2 coming out as well. Ah, great. You're doing the Lord's work. I wonder if he'll watch it. 3 hours. There's a part 2. There may be a part 3. So basically, I was like drafting it, and I split it into sections. 4 sections, right? And that's not 4 parts. I mean like 4 chapters, right? Almost 4 sub videos. And then I looked at it and I was like halfway through writing it, and it was already as long as the first Thomas Sowell video. I was like, this thing's going to be like 5 hours long. Now, there are 5-hour video essays out there. I don't think people would hate it. I do feel like 4 is kind of... You don't see many, at least on BreadTube, longer than 4. Like, ContraPoint's most recent video is about 4. H-Bomber Guy, FD Signifier, right? Like, you don't see that many longer than 4. Which doesn't mean I can't make a 5-hour one, but I do think... Yeah, 5 hours is such a long time. I think 4 is like... You can imagine watching that in an evening. Or maybe splitting it into 2. 5 seems like it's long. I suppose the reference point in my mind is probably like a film. Like, I can imagine a film being 4 hours, right? There are 4-hour films. There are a lot of 3-hour films. But 5 hours just seems a bit much. But also, on top of the like actual length, just as, you know, is it just too long as a video no matter what it's about? I think because it was going to cover so many different topics, including stuff like labour markets, social mobility, the minimum wage, as well as like race and culture, knowledge and expertise, and like intellectuals, all that shit. Because it was going to cover that, I thought, even if people do sit through it, I don't know what they're going to take away from it. I feel like they might get confused. Because, I mean, they might be able to take away the final message, but, like, it's... Even one of the sections is, like, quite technically involved, I think. Perhaps even more so than the first one. Because the first one was, like, quite fun. It was like a... Obviously, it was relatively dense for, like, compared to, like, a video about, you know, Avatar. But it was also... like a bit of a romp, because I just like talked about random shit like Alexander the Great, and there was that bit about like needs versus wants, which is relatively accessible, and yeah, so I feel like the next bits are a little bit more technical, and so having like the technical stuff on all of those topics, I think it's just too much to bear. So I've been debating. It seems likely I'm going to split it up now, part 2, into 4 parts or something. It's like Harry Potter, right? How many parts I split it up into is not clear to me yet. It could be 4, as in 4 of the each of the chapters of the what was going to be a 5-hour or 6-hour video, or I could do it as a trilogy on Thomas Sowell. So 2 more videos that are like quite long, maybe as long as the first one. Or I could maybe miss out. I've kind of flirted with avoiding the debate about race and culture, partly because I don't know as much about it, partly because it's a bit of a firecracker, that one. And you know, I don't how much insight do I possess into like African American culture? Like, you know, why are you going to listen to me on that? For obvious reasons. Not even American, right? So I've considered skipping that and maybe coming back to it at a later date with a different video. But I don't know. I'll have to see. I really will have to see. Also, if I split it up, I will be able to release, like, obviously the first part sooner than if I waited to put it all together. Why do you think Thomas Sowell is so popular? I think there are numerous reasons. I do think that conservative intellectuals get elevated a bit relative to their, like, contribution to the academy. If you look at things like, you know, I'm sorry, it sounds like a left-wing conspiracy theory, but things like Koch money and free copies of certain books that are made available, like Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson. But there are positives. There are things about Thomas Sowell that make him appealing, right? That are separate from whether you think, like, there's a pro-conservative bias, or not even a pro-conservative bias overall, but enough funding and influence for conservatives to elevate him into the national debate. He's very prolific. He's written, 30 books? Right? He's still writing now. He released that book, Social Justice Fallacies, which I'm going to release on stream. I'm going to read on stream, by the way. So Social Justice Fallacies, yeah, that's like his latest book, and he was 93 when that came out. So he does release a lot of books. He engages, I think, with a lot of issues that matter to people, that people are concerned about with economics, the minimum wage, race and culture, social mobility, and how countries grow, how wealth is created. He engages with all of this stuff and much more. Education, charter schools. He writes very clearly. I wouldn't say he's like a fun and lively writer. He's quite tedious, but he does write very clearly. Like, you don't come away from a Thomas Sowell book being like, oh, I didn't really understand what he thought or what he meant. It's always crystal clear. Like, seriously, he makes forceful and clear arguments. There's no two ways about it. I think he also seems to cite evidence in a way that I don't think is obvious to, like, non-academics, at least to people without degrees, but maybe even to people with degrees, that how he uses evidence is extremely sus. Although there is one other thing to say, is that you say, why is Thomas Sowell so popular? I mean, in one sense, he isn't, right? Sowell is not just overrepresented on the internet, right? So Sowell isn't really respected in academia. He does have some stands who are more among the kind of University of Chicago old guard where he trained, like Milton Friedman liked him, George Stigler, Gary Becker, I think, James Buchanan, and there's like the GMU economists who are overrepresented on the internet, George Mason University, they like him as well. But I don't really think, you know, it's no exaggeration to say that you can go through an entire economics degree, an entire PhD, and frankly, you could probably go through an entire successful career in economics as an economist in academia, or maybe working for the government, for a central bank, or perhaps working for even in the private sector. You could go through a successful career as an economist without hearing about Thomas Sowell, right? Whereas, for example, you couldn't go through a successful career as an economist without hearing about Milton Friedman. They have similar views on a lot of things, right? Both University of Chicago, but you will hear about Friedman, if only for the permanent income hypothesis and his contributions to economic methodology. You won't hear. There's nothing that Thomas Sowell has contributed that has like any stature in the academy, right? Because a lot of his arguments aren't sourced properly. They aren't academic. He doesn't engage with modern statistical techniques, the kind that economists really focus on these days. He just doesn't engage with them, not reliably anyway. So he's not that popular in the academy. But even among like pop economics, I mean, I used to blog, right? I used to blog in the heyday of the economics blogosphere, which was like, I guess, the 2010s. Maybe a bit before that. Maybe it was something like 2005 to 2015. And from interacting with people online and libertarians online, I will have heard the name Thomas Sowell at some point. I did know it. I'd heard it. But even though libertarianism, American libertarianism, was still extremely overrepresented on those blogs, right? And equated with economics when it's not. I still didn't hear that much about Thomas Sowell. It's not just that he's overrepresented like outside the academy, right? I mean, I think most people who read popular economics books, they're more likely to have heard of like Freakonomics, Tim Harford, the undercover economist, maybe Hajun Chang, Mariana Mazzucato, Stephanie Kelton, Kate Raworth, maybe even Stephen Landes, I think. There's a lot of these pop economics books, and I don't think Sowell's up there with those ones. So I think he's not that popular with the sort of pop econ crowd, not as much as you might think, as well as not being in the academy. But even on the internet, I don't think he was that popular in the economics blogosphere. I didn't hear about him. It's literally YouTube, right? And it wasn't until I started YouTubing that I started seeing Thomas Sowell everywhere. And I think as YouTube has probably grown, and now you've got more economics video essays, or more video essays, and more going on YouTube, and people use it more as a source of information, as a source of media instead of the TV and stuff. Sowell's influence has probably spread out of YouTube in the past few years, right? But he is overrepresented, right? Not just outside the academy, not just on the internet, but on YouTube specifically. So it's easy to overestimate his influence. Now, with that said, he has still sold a lot of books. But selling a lot of books is like, it's not actually that many in absolute number, right? Someone can sell a lot of books and still most people don't know them or haven't heard of them. But everyone's heard of Freakonomics, right? So the answer is partly because I think he is elevated by the conservative idea industrial complex, partly because he has obvious appeal. Don't underestimate his ability to make an argument, but partly because you're probably overestimating his influence by being on YouTube.